Music and war have a close association. Not just in the many songs written about real or imaginary battlefields, but also in the way that certain songs have come to define the mood of a wartime era.
This is the end, beautiful friend.
This can leave us with the impression that war is inspirational, that trauma, grief, pride, and fear can be translated into groundbreaking works of art.
There's no shows, because when there's loud music, you can miss the air raid siren, and the next thing you know, you're dead.
The reality of music during wartime is a bit more complicated.
We have a release in 2 days, but we are kind of like so far from it. You're like, okay.
Really, the days are the same. It's like the time has no meaning. Checking for news, looking at your phone, hoping that your house back home wasn't bombed.
I was fortunate to speak with two Ukrainian musicians, Eugene from La Horsa Bianca and Lessig from Somali Yacht Club. Both incredible underground bands whose lives have been completely upended by war. Both were quick to point out that their situations were far from the worst. In a war where civilian deaths have become commonplace, the plight of indie bands is not exactly the biggest tragedy. However, as a channel that tends to specialize in music under extreme situations, I encourage them to share their stories, so we might all understand a little bit better what it's like to be in a band during war. First of all, for those who aren't familiar, you might be surprised by the eclectic and experimental music coming out of Ukraine. Talking with Lessig, I got the sense he came from a tight-knit scene, like any great music town.
People hang out with each other, so like doesn't matter what you play, or some psychedelic rock or black metal. Everyone knows each other, and we can accidentally meet someone at the bar, have some beers, and have a good conversation about music.
Lessig's band, Somali Yacht Club, is exactly the kind of genre-fusing psychedelic metal band that, as a music nerd, gets your attention. Coming from the city of Lviv, they formed in 2010 and have since left a sizable mark on stoner metal and shoegaze music internationally.
We had a lot of plans for this spring. Had a European tour planned with Mars with Sky, and then actually in a week we should have been playing in London, but of course it's not happening. We just barely started seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with COVID, and now it's far worse.
Of course, men aged 18 to 60 are currently not allowed to leave the country, with only a few exceptions. But this is hardly the only roadblock for a band like Lessig's. With some 12 million Ukrainians currently displaced, many bands find themselves separated, with no clear timetable on when they'll be back together in the same room.
Frankly speaking, I haven't not been at my home for such a long time ever in my life. So we haven't met, but we talk, but I don't know. All our thoughts are not with music right now.
The issue is even more pronounced for Eugene and his band La Horsa Bianca. Coming from the city of Kharkiv, which saw intense bombing from the very start of the war, they were immediately thrust into survival mode.
The apartment building I live in, it was built in the 1920s to 1930s, and it had a built-in bomb shelter, an actual one with iron doors and iron girders in the ceiling. It was very run down and very dilapidated and dirty, and we had to clean it up as we were sheltering in there. But nevertheless, it was something that was safe, and it was close to home. I could get out of there and pop back in between the air raid sirens.
In theory, air raid sirens are supposed to come in pairs, the first being a warning to head to shelter, and the second being the all clear to leave. But in the early days of the war, everyone was still getting the hang of this, including the siren operators.
It seemed that some people were quite lucky in that they knew when they could go back to their apartment and they had time to shower and eat and do stuff like that. While I was still like sitting down there waiting and thinking, okay, now it's probably safe, and I would go back, and in an hour they would start shooting again.
Eugene was speaking to me from a safer city in western Ukraine, which he arrived at after a week in the bomb shelter. The rest of the band is scattered across different cities, even countries. Olga, who plays keyboards, was traveling abroad when the war broke out, though she is currently working remotely to support Kharkiv. She is also Eugene's wife.
She happened to be out, yeah. She went to visit some friends.
Wow.
And then one morning I called her and said, hey.
Oh my god. Only Kirill, who plays guitar, is still in Kharkiv, where, being a film operator by trade, he's documenting daily life in a city under war. La Horsa Bianca is an eclectic psychedelic and prog rock band. Exactly the kind of group you want in your scene, bringing a brighter, dopamine-inducing sound to balance out the darker post-punk and metal bands. Speaking with Eugene, I was struck by the similarity of our musical upbringing, despite his coming at the waning days of the Soviet Union.
The first prog band in my life was, of course, Pink Floyd. And also, yes, of course, the other prog record that we had was Jesus Christ Superstar. That's actually a prog album, you know?
That's awesome. I love that album. While La Horsa Bianca does not gig around super often, they do practice frequently, improvising lawn jams that are then transcribed, relearned, and molded into completed songs. Eugene fortunately has all the recordings of their latest demos with him, but when exactly they'll be able to work on them again is unclear.
One of the pubs where I used to perform with my previous band has been demolished by a rocket strike.
Wow. Obviously it wasn't the target.
No one really knows what was the target. It was in a residential building that was just...
Wow.
All of our gear is still in Kharkiv, so, you know, there's that. We have to either go back home or recover that, or if bad comes to worse, then we have to build it all again. But I'm not sure if it's going to be possible to start over if we have to leave home. Everyone has their own family. Everyone is in their own situation. It's very unlikely we would end up together in the same city again.
I think it's important to point out a misconception that many people have about this war, myself included. Many articles early on talked about how ordinary citizens were arming up, picking up AK-47s distributed by the government, throwing Molotov cocktails from their sedans, and hauling away Russian tanks with tractors. It leaves you with the impression that virtually everyone is at the front lines, engaged in fighting. But this is rather far from the truth.
If you had prior military, served in army, I believe that would be, easier for you to go to the territorial defense, and then they will hand you, something.
The reality is, the Ukrainian military is still quite strict on who can join their ranks. The volunteer branch, known as the Territorial Defense, has been so flooded with requests there aren't enough weapons or equipment to go around. If you're a musician who doesn't have any prior combat training, you're probably going to be asked to serve your country in other ways, by working your day job, bringing in money, taking care of neighbors, and so on. Of course, there are exceptions. Over the last decade, Sasha Boole has made a career performing dark folk songs in a country blues style. Shortly after the war broke out, he joined the Territorial Defense, where, according to Rolling Stone, he received training for tactical medicine. Similarly, Ivan Kozakevich from the metal band Sectorial joined the Territorial Defense, as did members of the band Boombox, who were about to leave on a North American tour before the war started. And these are just the big names. This photo was posted to the Instagram account of Mdou Club, a music venue in the city of Dnipro in eastern Ukraine. Several of its employees are gearing up for war, including the founder himself. Seeing this photo reminded me of an anecdote I'd heard about World War I. In the early days, Britain tried to ramp up recruitments by allowing groups of young men to enlist and serve together. Called PALS battalions, they were men who worked in the same factory, played together on rugby teams, or hung out at the same pub. The downside was that, during particularly bloody battles like the Battle of the Somme, entire PALS battalions were wiped out, rendering a whole community without its young men. Indeed, in the present day, when you hear about entire cities like Mariupol getting flattened, civilian life all but disappearing, it does seem to be the case that music scenes that once existed are now gone completely.
For me personally, it's a bit hard when you constantly hear about people dead and all those tragic things. You kind of think it's something sacrilegious to listen to music in some way.
While the experiences of musicians have varied quite widely, it seems like this reaction is universal. The inability to even think about music.
After a week spent in the bomb shelter and trying to get outside, I have found it really hard to listen to music. And I realized then that I couldn't listen to new music because I didn't want it to come associated with this experience. Like the new track from King Gizzard to become for the rest of my life the track I listened to when I was a refugee. So the music I went back to when I realized I wanted that experience of listening to music was I first listened to the Beatles and then to Jesus Christ Superstar, because it's something that for me is bigger than any experience because it's been with me for so long.
My mind is clearer now.
I know what album I listened probably first, and it was an album of a band from Kharkiv called Kat. They released an album on first or on second, so it was planned ahead for that day, but coincidentally the invasion began, and for me it kind of a soundtrack for that feeling, anticipation and feeling of war ahead. Some lines in their lyrics were like, oh my god, this is what's happening.
Though Lessig and his bandmates have little appetite for music right now, the reality of being a band signed to a label and working with various agents is that plans are often made months in advance. In late April, their third full-length album, The Space, was released. This forced the conversation about future shows, when and if travel becomes possible. The dilemma, Lessig explains, is that playing festivals abroad could mean sharing the stage with bands from Russia.
The thing that really struck me when the war began is that even Russian bands that were positional, very anti-government or so, some of them still didn't make a clear statement against the war.
Prior to the 2022 invasion, the Russian and Ukrainian underground music scenes were actually fairly connected. Lessig told me about a Ukrainian band he's friends with who actually got to know some Russian bands quite well, even sharing apartments together when on the road. But since the war started, as bands from throughout the world have flooded their inboxes with messages of concern, their Russian counterparts have been radio silent.
Would you have trouble just looking them in the eyes?
I'm not sure about them because I certainly wouldn't blame them personally. Yeah, but there is kind of a certain, anger.
My own feelings on this are mixed. For those of us who come from a country with freedom of speech, it's a bit short-sighted to criticize ordinary Russians. Would you or I be so brave when the potential consequence is losing your job, going to prison, or having to flee the country without knowing when you'll see your family again? At the same time, I certainly understand Lessig's perspective, considering what is happening to his country. Given that this video is about the experiences of bands during war, I do think it's appropriate to step away briefly and take a look at what's happening east of the border. The Western media tends to emphasize the musicians who are speaking out, like rappers Oxymiron and Morgenstern. But this isn't really the majority. A series of pro-military concerts were held across Russia last month, featuring many big names like Sergei Galani, Pilot, Uma Thurman, Fabrica, and others. Those who do speak out faced a lot of ridicule. There's bitter op-eds calling these musicians traitors, posters that randomly appear in public lampooning them for selling out to the West. Most have fled the country, and a new law proposed in the State Duma would prevent them from playing shows should they return. For small, independent artists, there's a palpable sense of loss. For 20 and 30-somethings, the free Russia they grew up in is gone, a period of isolation beginning. Being unable to post on Western social media, upload songs to Spotify, or earn money from YouTube, their prospects for having a career in music have been reduced dramatically. And let's be clear, this is not to say there's an equivalence between Russian and Ukrainian bands right now.
The thing that sucks is that in each, more or less big city, you are not safe because we have, air raid sirens, each day, I would say. People are having, mental problems with that because you are, constantly in stress. Frankly speaking, I'm remembering lockdown right now as a vacation.
Worrying about your income stream dwindling is a luxury compared to what many Ukrainians are experiencing.
We don't know what's going to happen. The planning horizon, as it were, has been reduced down to, a day if you're in a safe place, or to 5-hour stops if you're in Kharkiv or a city like that and in constant danger.
So there is no water there, and the buildings stay completely without the windows.
On internet forums and in comment sections, you'll often find this tongue-in-cheek comment about how maybe the war will inspire a renaissance of aggressive Ukrainian metal. I posed this question to Lessig, not really expecting him to take it seriously, but to my surprise, he didn't think it was that far-fetched.
I think time will tell, but right now, if we had to rehearse, definitely our stuff that we would be working on would be much heavier. We were joking among ourselves that our next record would be some cover violence or grindcore or something like that, because we were at that time we were really pissed off.
Eugene's band La Horsa Bianca faces a few more hurdles, namely getting everyone back in the same country, then figuring out if they can safely move back to Kharkiv, and if they still have a practice space there. But even so, he remains optimistic.
We will have shows and we will come back stronger than ever after we're victorious. But until then, the main thing is don't let us become old news. Because when the world stops caring, it will make it increasingly hard for us to keep up.
For anyone that's interested, I'll include links below to both bands' Spotify and Bandcamp pages. There will also be a link to this list of amazing Ukrainian post-punk, darkwave, ambient, and folk bands. Since there's a lot of different charities out there, I also posed the question if there's any particularly good places to donate money. For both, the answer was immediate: the Ukrainian military. But acknowledging that not everyone feels right giving money directly to the armed forces, they also recommended some alternative charities that give supplies like medicine or that help refugees. Olga's charity, Dopomoha Kharkiv, is supporting hospitals in their hometown and assisting elderly and limited mobility people in need of evacuation, food, or medicine. There will be links to all of these below. Thanks for watching.